Okay, so we've got some questions and answers hopefully as well now. So I'm going to start with Paula and let Oisin have a little bit of a break and get his breath back. So, Paula, your first question. Have you any advice for a parent who does their best to limit sugar intake for child at home but feels frustrated by the amount of sugar consumed on play dates and parties?
Yeah, it is. It's something I used to have a bit of a problem with myself. I think there's a lot of parents' voices being heard at the moment around this issue, and there's some great campaigns around the country. One of them is is it Sweets After School or something like that? Where concerned parents are looking at where their child is spending time and maybe being rewarded with sugar. And so the school is one obvious place, and these parents have got together and just really, I suppose, started the debate about how we reward kids, you know, and usually it is with a sweet instead of a colouring book. You know, I think if you really feel there are other like-minded people out there, and I'm sure there are, it's worth getting together sometimes and actually see what you can do, you know, whether it's in the football club, again, where kids are treated after a bout of exercise, which isn't that intense, with biscuits and orange. You know, that's the general kind of stuff. But I actually think we need to make our voice heard. And parents together collectively, I've lost my voice, but parents together collectively can really have a huge effect. And it always brings me back, because I know a lot of us think, no, our voice doesn't count, but when I worked in Superquinn years ago with Fergal Quinn, one of the things that we actually had was a customer call service, and the phone really never rang that much on any particular topic until genetically modified foods came up for discussion. And we were the first supermarket, Superquinn, because of the voice of the consumer, who said to our suppliers in turn, no, we do not want genetically modified ingredients in Superquinn foods until the message from the biotechnologists is clear and consumers have accepted it. But it was astonishing, because it only came from a few selected consumers, first of all. But, you know, when people raise issues like that, it snowballs. And there are an awful lot of us that are concerned about the sugar and the ubiquitous nature of sugar. So I really do think, if you're concerned, start talking to other people, galvanise your efforts together and collectively shout.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Oisin, my 9-year-old boy can read but has difficulty in comprehending and answering questions when asked. He has told me he does not like reading. How can I get him more interested in reading?
I'm not sure, is this one working? Yeah. There's two questions there, actually. One is about the comprehending, and the other is about getting them to read. The getting them to read is, in some ways, is quite simple. Is ask him what he, well, you'll already know, what is he passionate about. I mean, I'm a writer, my wife's a librarian, and we could not get our son to read books at one point. He would read Match of the Day, and he would read Match of the Day, the same one, over and over again. But if you think about reading and like the sheer number of words that the child reads, well, if they're reading one of those magazines in a week, they're probably reading the equivalent of a short book. So I would say first thing is reading is reading. First get them reading, get them passionate about reading, and not even passionate about reading itself, but actually get them used to it, get that as part of their life, that they get some of their information for life from reading. In terms of comprehension, that's a trickier one, because that's obviously something not being dealt well enough in school. And I think sometimes that is lost in the idea that we think that once a child can decipher, that they can then comprehend. My mother used to have a great example of this. She worked with a Down syndrome girl who was brilliant at reading out loud. And she did not understand half the words that she was reading, but she could decipher. And I think that is, there's obviously a gap there where somebody's not checking how well he understands the words. But I think that could be a matter of reading with him. Say 9 years old. I would say spend a bit more time with them reading. One of the great books to do that with is the Mr. Gum books, because they're hilarious. They're actually much funnier to read out loud than they are to read quietly. And it's a great one to read with an older child. They're kind of an art, Mr. Gum. So I think the first one is You're a Bad Man, Mr. Gum. And there's a real play with words, they're daft stuff, but when you read them out loud, they're really funny. And some of the Roald Dahl books are like that as well. So remember, even if they're 8 or 9, they're not too old to be read too. They might be too cool. But you can get over that a bit, you know. So I would say just spend a bit more time reading with them. And if it's not stories, then something else, you know. But the comprehension one's a tricky one because that is technical. That's learning as opposed to just kind of inspiring passion in it. But you know, even that learning comes with a passion for the reading.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Paula, primary school children's eating breaks are less than adults' tea breaks. Eating too fast is not good, and some children go without eating. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, all right. I actually think, again, parents can, if they have trouble, can talk to teachers about this. And I do think teachers are probably busy getting ready for whatever's on next or whatever event that they're hosting next. But I do think children probably need to be taught a little bit more about mindful eating at that break. In other words, rather than get into the big chat about, you know, whatever, you know, creative story they're going to come up with, to actually just to quietly eat something first before they start playing, because an awful lot of it is about chat and they don't actually, you know, they don't actually eat. So if there's a problem like that, I think it's well worth having a chat with the teacher first of all, and then obviously making sure that whatever they have in the lunchbox is accessible as well, because sometimes it isn't. You know, expecting a child to eat something that's really large that they can barely get their hands around, or, you know, grapes with seeds in it where, you know, they're spitting out pips and things like that, yogurt pots that they can't open. You know, there's a lot of things that don't work in the school lunchbox or the break. So, I don't know, is there anybody with some ideas on that? Maybe throw that open to the floor. Lunchbox in the winter, yeah. Right.
Okay, we might leave that there because we could have a whole debate on lunchtime.
Just know that from visiting a lot of schools, I know that some schools make the kids finish their food before they're allowed to go out. And they're actually given time, there's a set time when they're not allowed to go out, that they eat their food in. So the first 10 minutes, they don't go out. In the shorter break, it's trickier. But certainly in lunch break, they have a lot of time for eating before they allowed play.
Okay. Oisin, then, my 10-year-old son has a mild form of dyslexia. Apart from the dyslexia books available in libraries, what additional reading, writing material do you recommend to help encourage creative writing, etc.?
Well, yeah, the first thing I was going to say is dyslexia-friendly books. Barrington Stoke, if you haven't tried them, are great, and there's a massive range. They're all established writers, and I've done 2 Barrington Stoke books, and it's an editing like I have never experienced before, because you have the normal edit, the copy edit, and you have what's called a language edit, where somebody phones you up and you spend an hour on the phone going through the book looking for all the tricky things that a reluctant reader or a reader with dyslexia might stumble over. The other thing is kind of look for bigger books but that have simple language. The Wimpy Kid books are good for that. Or books that are heavily illustrated, and that's becoming more common, where books for older readers are becoming more heavily illustrated. But I mean, if you have, for whoever it is, if you have a child with dyslexia, you probably know a lot of the problems already. So where type isn't very clear on the page, or they've used an unusual font, or the color of the page doesn't help. These are things kind of to look for in books. I think that the real trick is to find maybe a librarian who knows a bit about this. If your local library, if you find a librarian who knows about this, or it's a tricky one because dyslexia varies, and most types of kind of things that affect reading can be so different. So it's without knowing specifically, and I'm not an expert on reading issues either. So, but the first thing I would say is look for those books that are designed to be friendly for dyslexic readers. And beyond that, again, whatever their passion is. But there's things like, how clear is the text on the page? How clear is the language? Is it too complicated? The sentence is too long? And we're, strangely enough, in publishing, children's editors are not trained in this. We assume that editors in publishing are trained about language levels and about reading difficulties. They're not. They learn on the job. So actually, you need to look at the publishers who do this stuff specifically.
Okay, thank you. I'll just answer a final question to both. I won't answer, I'll ask. Sorry. I'll ask a final question to both speakers. So, Paula, just your last question then. How do we deal with child's love for food? Our daughter, aged 9, absolutely loves food, and should there not be our constant restraint for her overeating? She'd be doing that always. She understands the nutritional effects, for instance, extra kilos, and the social implication that come with that, but still unable to control on her own.
Unable to control on her own, yeah. God, I need a half an hour for that one. But I suppose, we don't fully understand all of the parameters in this, obviously, because we're not given them and we haven't got that person in front of us. But, some of it is gene-linked, some of it is environmental and behavioural. So I suppose you do have to kind of really take a good medical and diet history. What we do know is that you can override young children's cues, early in life. So this idea of finishing what's on your plate, taking the last bite, don't waste food, all of that, really we review that, and that isn't a good idea. So we give children small child's portions initially when they're growing at toddler stage, and we let them come back and ask for more, as opposed to giving them what we think will be a good portion. So you try and underestimate as opposed to overestimate. So very often, I think there were periods, I suppose, when certainly my son was growing up, that you'd look at the plate and the plate of his mates, and they'd all be the same as the parents. But really, when they're younger, we need to give them smaller portions so that we're not overriding the natural innate cues that they have to say, I'm full, I've had enough. And so the role of the parent is to provide the correct food, and to provide variety in terms of good, healthy foods. But the child is responsible for when they've had enough, and I suppose we have to be very respectful of that in young children, because sometimes we do override it. I'm not saying that that's what's happened. This is difficult. I suppose the child is now able to rationalise and have a good discussion around that, and I suppose it's about a little bit of slowing down as well, to teach children not to leave it to the last minute to eat, to have snacks in between so they're absolutely not starving coming to the table, and to maybe take the edge off the hunger with a couple of glasses of water before a meal, not during the meal but before the meal, so that it helps them to really take it at a different pace. Because what we do know is we can pack in an awful lot of food very quickly before the chemical message goes to the brain to say we're full. So if we're chewing a lot, that actually helps us to slow down as well. And unfortunately, a lot of processed foods that we're now currently looking at, that children love, they don't require an awful lot of chewing. So they're down, they're packed in the stomach very quickly before we get the cues to the brain to say we're done, we're full. So things like slowing down, and again, I come back to mindful eating, which I think should be taught in every school. We don't have to go around in silence as the Buddhist monks did, eating and savouring and, being present in front of the food, but just that there are some interesting techniques that we could all really benefit from. So I think tackle the behavioural, and also the child understood, I think, the complications of maybe overeating. I think that's what you were saying, but I wouldn't focus on the negative. I'd say I'd look at the quality of the food, and again get the balance right, because very often we can have a full plate of food. It depends on what's on the plate.
Okay, thank you very much. And just very quickly, Oisin, there's a short question here. Lots of children now only read on their Kindles or e-readers. Do you have a particular opinion about that?
I think some of that is just the sign of the times. I'm not against one or the other. What we're finding now is there's a tail off with reading on devices. They've kind of maxed out, and now we find a lot of us read certain types of things. So I probably read more on screen than I do off paper now, but I still prefer a book for the immersion of the story. And for there was a big push to get schools to use iPads or those kind of things because it saved on the cost of textbooks. It wasn't saving enough, frankly. But now what they're finding is because kids expect to be distracted on those because they do more than one thing, they actually don't read for as long. So in terms of the immersion in a story, immersion always sounds like, you know, your hot water. In terms of immersing oneself in a story, a book is still proving to be more effective because it only does one thing. And it's easier on the eyes. You know, I know the Kindle have kind of e-paper as opposed to light, but so I don't think books are going anywhere. It's as I often say, you know, we didn't kill all the horses when we started using cars, but I think we will use. I think newspapers are on the way out, and it will be certain types of reading will be done on certain types of devices. You know, social media works well on a phone. You know, iPads are almost on their way out in terms of that stuff. But there'll be other things. You know, maybe iPad will become that scroll-out piece of paper that, you know, you read your news on. So I think it's going to be a case where we will read different types of things on different types of devices.
Okay, thank you very much.
Scotty, just one last thing, because somebody asked about the comprehension earlier on, and I just completely forgot. A really good habit to get into for anybody who doesn't, and I'm sure a lot of you do, but when we're talking to kids, if you use a word and you catch yourself using a word you don't think they'll understand, ask, do they understand it? I often work with young kids and I say, have you any questions? And then I go, do you know what a question is? Because of course they'll put up their hands and go, my mummy's 36, or my daddy picks his nose, and I'll say that's a statement. But yeah, we often forget that kids don't understand really basic words that we use, and once it becomes a habit that they know it's okay to say that they don't understand a word, they might ask. Okay. But it's still, whenever possible, ask, do they understand? So get into the habit of the idea that comprehending is something that they do actively. Okay. So that, I don't know, that might help a little bit as well.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you to Paula and Oisin for taking all the questions and for their thoughts this afternoon.